Today I wanted to talk about happiness because there's a quote by Oscar Levin which goes, "Happiness is not something that you experience, it's something that you remember." Now, this struck me as being somewhat similar to another quote I heard, this one from Andy Bernard. "I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them." Now, via Bernard's, I believe we can get a better understanding of what Levin was getting at. Because while it's a bit less didactic in tone, I believe it reflects the same sort of truth that Levin was touching upon. And it's a truth that I believe is only a half-truth. So, I overall disagree with Oscar Levin's quote, happiness isn't something you experience, it's something you remember, because for the truth it does represent, I believe it lacks nuance, and overall it gets more wrong than it does right. So, to reiterate, firstly, I believe that the quote truly does capture the phenomenon in which we fondly remember the past and maybe gloss over the finer details or mundanities. But I, secondly, believe that it lacks nuance and is not a complete story on happiness. So let's talk about the first point. Oscar Levin was brilliant enough to observe that the experience and the way we feel about the experience is not often reflected in the memory of that experience. And this is a potent quote because we're all sure to have felt this at one time or another. You know, just as Andy Bernard was touching upon, we might look back and ascribe the title Good Old Days to a certain period of our life and gloss over some of the finer details or mundanities that don't really appeal to us. You know, for example, we're sure to have experienced delayed gratification because, you know, some experiences are overtly unpleasant in the moment and exist as mountains to be surpassed. So, the surpassing is to be enjoyed, but not necessarily before it's achieved. And we see this in exercise, the watching of horror movies, thrill rides, and any setting of strenuous long-term goals. So like I said, this is a very real phenomenon, but it's not by no means the complete story on happiness. So my second point is that happiness is a colloquial enough term that we may not realize we may not realize all of the various nuances within it and the various forms it can take. We might unthinkingly characterize any pleasant feeling as happiness, and we wouldn't be very far off, but I do believe there's more room for precision. So for example, we might experience joy and call that happiness. We might experience, simple pleasures of life and call that happiness. Or we might have a sense of great purpose in our life, and we might call that happiness as well. So Oscar Levin was partly correct in saying happiness isn't something you experience, it's something you remember. Because it's true that we experience some of our happiness after the fact. But happiness is more complicated than is represented in Oscar Levin's rendering of its one facet. And for that reason, I disagree overall with the quote, because happiness can be felt in many forms, other than just the one that Oscar represents in his quotes. Happiness is not something you experience, it's something you remember.